Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the winners and the losers as I saw it from the NFL draft. Didn't like throwing too many losers around, but a couple of teams that just didn't necessarily love what they did. I think the Browns is one that didn't necessarily hate the players that they got, kind of hate the order in which they got them, but at the end of the day, a very, very successful draft for a lot of teams out there. The Ravens and the Eagles just continue to do their thing in the draft. But let's get into all the different things that have happened over really the past about month that I have not been doing the show. Again, apologies for that. We will get back into the groove and a big time, spring recap coming next week. A lot of different things coming down the pipe here pretty soon. But let's go ahead and jump into this and we'll talk about the biggest story that happened while I was on a little bit of a hiatus. Nico Iamaleava, and it's officially over. The saga is officially finished now. There's a couple of payments that have to happen that we can talk about at a different date, but at the end of the day, to summarize, if you have been living under a rock for the last little bit, Nico Iamaleava was making around 2.2, 2.4, depending on who you ask, dollars at Tennessee this past year. Around December, him and his father, who is his representation, that's a big part of the story. In December, they come to Tennessee, say he should be making more. Star quarterbacks in NIL era. Sounds like $4 million seems to be the going rate. That's what they wanted to make, and Tennessee was not having that. They were not budging from December all the way to the time when he didn't show up to spring practice the day before the spring game, and that was a very, very messy exit. There are a lot of different people to blame, including Nico, including in part Tennessee for different reasons. But it sounds like his dad played a very, very big role in this. And it's not to put all the blame on Nico Iamaleava's dad by any means. But his father and his advisors seem to have quite a bit of power in this situation. He left Tennessee, found his way to UCLA. The issue is he will be making $1.75 million at UCLA. Still a lot of money for a 19-year-old to be making, but I don't know if you know anything about state income tax, but it's a little bit nicer to you over there in Tennessee than it is in California. Point being, he lost money. There is not a winner here. Well, we'll talk about that here in a second. But in terms of Nico Iamaleava, he lost. He lost this transaction. He went to a not as good team that will have less talented players around him, that will give him less money, that he will make less of because of taxes, and all of these different things have gone downward for him. All this being said, I want him to succeed. I think Nico, by all of the accounts that you have heard beyond this story, beyond, the connection to the recruiting and all of that type of stuff, he seems to be a nice kid. He seems to be someone that has a good head on his shoulders, obviously got a little bit over his skis in this scenario, not trying to excuse him by any means, but at the end of the day, you have a kid that is going to a new team, has to learn a new offense, and although I love what Tino Sunseri is going to do over there at UCLA, it'll be a really interesting thing to watch. Now, the other part of this that we have to talk about just a little bit while Deshaun Foster tries to figure out all of the different moving parts around him and the Iamaleava family, because Madden came on back over from Arkansas, but at the end of the day, we'll break that down at a different date. Joey Aguilar was the guy that came in to UCLA from App State this past season. He was set up to be the starter. He thought he was the starter, and he was the starter until very recently. He has walked out of town and walked right on over to Knoxville. He is going to be the start. He might be the starting quarterback for Tennessee as they move into the next season. A little bit of a quarterback trade between UCLA and Tennessee. At the end of the day, Tennessee lost here. Although they lost, they stood their ground. They made sure they didn't bend the knee to a quarterback that is not worth $4 million. I want to make that very clear. So Tennessee, I do think, made the right decision there. He didn't get better as a football team. I can promise you that. Nico Iamaleava is a better quarterback than Joey Aguilar is. If that's the starter, if Gaston Moore ends up being the starter, if Merklinger ends up being the starter, if McIntyre, whoever it is, ends up being the starter over there in Knoxville, they're not going to be as good as the guy that just walked out the door. The guy that just walked out the door is also not worth $4 million, and definitely not worth losing your respect of a lot of other people in the locker room because you bend the knee to him. So I agree with the decision that Tennessee made. It's not going to make them better at football necessarily. So that's a different thing. Overall, just about everyone lost here. Now, UCLA won just a little bit. They were able to get Nico, their younger brother Madden, who was committed to UCLA, went to Arkansas because of very similar reasons that Nico ended up leaving Tennessee. He has found his way back to UCLA, and that's a whole situation. Arkansas wants some of that NIL money back in. It sounds like he's going to have to pay it back. We'll get into all of that. That is a total other issue and prove just how bad this system is right about now. But at the end of the day, UCLA is a moderate winner here. They get a better quarterback. They get a guy that could execute the Tino Sunseri offense very effectively. At the end of the day, there's no other winners. There's no other people that you can point at and say, way to go, kid. You did a great job. I think Tennessee handled this the right way. I'm not necessarily saying they handled this poorly or they should have paid up or anything like that. It's just to say they didn't necessarily get better as a football team, and that just kind of hurt. So overall, it's a mess. This entire situation has been a downright mess. There is a silver lining here, though. There is something here that we can talk about, and I think the biggest thing to remember here is we all know how bad college football has been. In the past 2 years, past 3 years, it's been a disaster. There's been so many different people moving around. There's been eligibility rules that have been as confusing as can be. There's been so many different things that have happened that have lessened the sport in one way or the other. Now everyone knows. It's not just college football fans. It's not just sports fans. It's not just people that see an article every now and then of a kid transferring for the 4th time. It's not just those people. It's now everyone. This was a huge story. Everyone knew about it. Everyone was talking about it. I got asked about it from people that I didn't even know liked football. The reality of the matter is people know, everyone understands how bad of a situation that you were in. It's a necessary evil. In the grand scheme of things, I do think it's a necessary evil. I think it's one of those moments, and it's happened a couple of different times over the last 4 or 5 years where someone's made a massive mistake or played their hand a little bit too aggressively, or the system has been shown to be absolutely flawed in every single way, and then it leads to a little bit of change and a little bit of a step forward. I think this will lead to a lot of bit of change and a big-time step forward. Just got to hope that it's the right people steering the ship, which is a whole other conversation. As of right now, they are not the right people, but hopefully we can make that happen here pretty soon, and I tend to believe it's going to have to happen here pretty soon. Obviously, something that we will get to in time, but overall, Nico made a mistake here. Now, I hope he succeeds at UCLA. I hope it works out for him. I hope he doesn't, hurt himself going forward in the NFL draft. I think he already has just a little bit, but all of that will be talked about ad nauseum. We will get into that throughout the season. We'll talk about, is he meeting the freeze point or whatever you want to call it for the next level? Is he making Tennessee fans mad because maybe he is worth the $4 million and they just didn't give it to him? Is Joey Aguilar playing the same level of football as Nico? There are a million different moving parts here. But the reality is, Nico Iamaleava will be the starting quarterback for UCLA. Joey Aguilar could very well be the starting quarterback for Tennessee. They tried to get a couple other guys, did not quite have the success that they were hoping for. But at the end of the day, first QB trade in NCAA history and college football history. I did not like it at all. I don't think anyone else liked it, but we move forward and we see what Tennessee does this year. I think they're still in a great shape as a program. I think this upcoming year just became a little bit more sketchy. And maybe we'll break down Tennessee's schedule in one of the upcoming weeks to really get into the nitty-gritty of that. But overall, you lost a very good player. He wasn't worth $4 million by any means, but you lost a very talented player at your quarterback position, and we'll see how Josh Heupel does with that, and we'll just follow this going forward. And we'll see what happens with these two quarterbacks. Could be a very interesting talk a year from now when we're breaking down these two guys. The other thing to talk about is the house settlement. It could be nearing a finish line of sorts, possibly, here pretty soon. Claudia Wilken is someone that we have talked about on this show, that I've talked about quite a bit. The judge that's kind of overseeing this case. The judge that is watching over this thing, making sure that everything is in order, everything is the way that it should be before it gets put into place. One last thing has to be done before we get that, and we'll get to that here in 2 seconds, but do want to do a quick refresher. The basic outline of the House Settlement Agreement, $20.5 million can be spent by each athletic department across athletic department. You can play around with that money as you see fit. The kind of going theory, at the very least, of how this money will be distributed is 75% to football, 15% to basketball, 5% to baseball, and then 5% to be split among the other sports. That is different depending on the college, different depending on the year probably going forward. But as of right now, that seems to be the idea of what's going to happen. Then you have no Title IX requirements, which is why 75% can go to football. That was kind of the last fight that was had in this courtroom, and ended up being a win for a lot of different athletic departments because they didn't want to split this money right down the middle. I can promise you that. Whether or not they should is a conversation that we can have. I can promise you that. But at the end of the day, no Title IX requirements here. They can split it as they see fit. Would go into effect on July 1st, 2025. And that's why you see a lot of different schools doing some different partnerships, doing some different, influx of money, getting assistant GMs that play in the NBA or the NFL or whoever to find a way to get a little bit more money into their athletic department. It's because there's quite a big bill coming on their desk this upcoming year, and then it's going to keep coming. So that's going to be a really interesting thing to watch, and definitely going to be something that we're going to have to watch over the next week, because so one more thing that has to happen here. One of the big things that is going to happen with this is the roster sizes will change. They will go from 125 in football down to 105. Would put no limit on scholarships, which could mean you could have 105 scholarship players in football. You could have less elsewhere. You could have everyone have scholarships in your entire athletic department. Not everyone has the money to do that, obviously, but at the end of the day, that is something that you could do. The big thing here that is kind of being pushed back on is what happens if this is put into place right now. There are 125 guys on the Penn State roster right now. If this gets put into place, you got to find 20 guys to get rid of, and it's going to be the 20 guys that just don't fit, the 20 walk-ons, the 20 guys that aren't quite up to the level of Penn State football, quote-unquote, but at the end of the day, it's going to be really tough to do in year one. So Claudia Wilkin told them, you got to find a way to grandfather these guys in. You can phase it in over the 4 years. Once you lose those guys that are grandfathered in, you can't, put more guys into that 125-man roster. You slowly work your way down to 105 over the next 4 years, and then you get going. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, you don't want to see people across all different types of sports, all different types of athletic departments, and maybe an entire sport in general be shut down because of this. So I think this is very, very necessary. Definitely something that has to happen. It sounds like it should have already happened in terms of getting a new proposal back to her. We'll see what happens over the next couple of days. I think that's going to be a huge topic over the next about 3 or 4 days. What happens with this? If it does get passed, it'll be one of the most profound changes in a very long time in college sports. It will be one of those moments that will change a lot of different things. And there will still be NIL money running around. There will still be transfer portal things to figure out. But it will give us a structure. It will give us a chance to figure out where we are as a sport, give us a chance to possibly find new leaders for this sport, and will obviously give us a chance to make this payment structure make just a little bit of sense. As of right now, it's all over the place. This will make it at least dial in just a little bit more. But that will be an interesting thing to watch. We will talk about it when it does or doesn't get passed, and if it doesn't, we'll talk about the implications of that, because that could be very, very interesting. But let's talk about Lee Corso here. Lee Corso is hanging him up after this year. He is someone that has been a fabric of college football for as long as about any of us can remember, if we're being totally honest. He has coached, he has played, he has been the central figure in my college football childhood. There's no doubt about that. He is a huge reason why I'm sitting in front of you right now. He is a huge reason why I'm doing this to however many people end up watching this. I love this dude. He is incredible throughout my childhood. He brought so much energy to this game. He gave everything he possibly could to college football. But he's going to wrap it up. After week 1 of the college football season coming up, Lee Corso will be retiring from College Game Day. If they do the headgear after he leaves, I will lose my mind. It will be the last time there will be headgear put on at College Game Day. At least that's what I'm telling myself right about now. But one of the most remarkable careers in sports, regardless of who you're talking about, what sport you're talking about, what level. A remarkable figure in college football and in sports in general. We do get one more week with them. That and the question that has been going around is, where do they end up going in that week 1? There is a very, very obvious one, and we'll talk about that one obviously. And then there's one that might not be quite as obvious, and we'll get into that one as well. But let's start with the obvious. Texas at Ohio State. That is the number 1 game of the weekend. Brutus has been was the very first headgear that Lee Corso ever put on, and his most worn headgear with 38 times that he's put on Brutus. It would make a lot of sense. Corso has put on Texas quite a bit, so they're not far down that list by any means either. But at the end of the day, this would be a very, very good ending. It's 2 incredible teams that have a chance to win the national title next year. One coming off the national title, 2 breaking in new quarterbacks. Arch Manning obviously going to be a huge storyline going into this one. And then you add the history he has with that headgear, with Brutus, with Ohio State, it definitely does make it special. That is not my pick, though. And my pick is Florida State against Alabama. Alabama is going down to Tallahassee to play a game in week 1. Bama's the number 2 in the amount of times that that Corso has put on that headgear. But the real thing here is Florida State. This is where he played. This is where he coached for a very long time. This is where a lot of his career happened. Before he was on, TV, before he was a guy that I knew about, before he was a guy that a lot of us knew about, he was the coach at Florida State, and I think that would be special. I think there would be a moment where we could celebrate a guy at the place that probably means more to him than any place in the entire country. He could go back down there, get the send-off that he very much deserves, and it would be a really good game. It'd be Alabama at Florida State. It'd be a team that is coming off a year that they would consider a disappointment over there in Tuscaloosa, having to find their way back. Florida State coming off a terrible year, and now they add Gus Malzahn, and they add Thomas Castellanos as their starter. It would be incredible to watch what Tallahassee would look like on that day. Everyone would come out. Generations upon generations of Florida State fans would be there for that game, not just because it's Alabama, but because it's Lee Corso. I think that would be special. Now, I think Ohio State would be plenty special as well. So it's not to say that I would be mad by any means if it was Texas at Ohio State. I just think this would be extra special for Lee Corso, and I think regardless, it would be awesome to watch one last ride with a guy that I wish we could get to watch forever, but that's not how this works. At the end of the day, he will be hanging him up. I think College Game Day is still in a great spot going forward. Adding a guy like Pat McAfee, adding Nick Saban, they have plenty going forward, but there's going to be something a little bit missing. We just got to see what happens. We got to see where they end up going, and then I will have my eyes glued to the TV from 9 to 12 that day. I can promise you that. But a couple other things here that I'll just talk about briefly. This one I'm not going to talk about. I'll be totally honest with you guys. I put it in here, frankly, just because I wanted to say that I was not going to address it. Mainly because it has nothing to do with football. It has nothing to do with the UNC football team. Now, it could very quickly, and we will talk about that when that does happen. Frankly, talking about this just makes me feel icky. I'll be totally honest with you. It makes me feel weird. I don't love it. I'm going to leave it at that. It does not pertain to UNC football as of right now. The second that it does, I can promise you we will talk about this. We'll get into whatever is happening over there in Chapel Hill, but right now it just makes me feel gross. So I'm not going to talk about it. We're going to move on forward and talk about a weird story here. That's Ian Shefflin. If you watch any college basketball, you probably know who this guy is. Was a power forward for Clemson for 4 years, found his way into the transfer portal, and found his way out as a football player and at Clemson. So it sounds like he is going to be a tight end for the Clemson football team this upcoming year. Weird. I'll be totally honest. I don't really have a huge reaction here. I don't necessarily think he's going to be a huge part of this team in 2025. Now, if you watch him play basketball, he's plenty aggressive. I can promise you that. And he will be a guy that, at the very least, will give it his best shot. It's more of just a cool story than anything else. Nothing overly crazy, or definitely crazy here, but at the end of the day, it's one of those things that I just had to touch on here for a second. If Ian Shefflin ends up winning the Mackey Award, it'll be one of the crazy stories in all of sports. But at the end of the day, that'll be a funny thing to watch. Dabo Swinney did not have to go far to do this recruitment, just walked on over to the basketball stadium and see if you want to come play tight end. But at the end of the day, very interesting story, and we will see what happens there. Did want to finish it on a little bit of a different note here. Kyron Lacey. Wanted to talk about him here for a second because Saturday was the funeral of Kyron Lacey. He passed away on April 12th, 2025 of an apparent suicide. He had gone through a very interesting time since he left LSU and got into the draft process, was not invited to the combine because of a legal issue he was going through, got into a car wreck that ended up killing a couple other people, tragically. A lot of different moving parts around that over since he finished the season at LSU and up until the time that he ended up passing. Just a sad situation all the way around. There's not really a great spin here by any means, but nonetheless, a very, very talented kid, a very young kid that passed away far too soon. There's no doubt about that. And his funeral was on Saturday, a day that he probably thought he was going to hear his name called in draft. And I think all of his family had planned for that day to be a day full of happiness, and it wasn't. It was a very, very sad day for them, but an incredible, incredible football player, someone that a lot of his teammates speak incredibly glowingly about, and just had a very, very complicated finish to life. And you hate to see it every single time something like this happens. Just feel like we should, celebrate that person. Kyron Lacy was an incredible, incredible player. His teammates loved him to death, and he made a huge mistake at the end of the day. So he didn't get to hear his name called. He didn't get to go to the NFL draft, but I'm sure he got to see a lot of his buddies get their name called in. Overall, just thoughts and prayers to the Lacy family. Incredibly unfair, taken from us far too soon. And on the day that he probably should have heard his name called in the NFL draft, his family was mourning him. But wanted to give a little bit of love there. Definitely wanted to highlight him before we got off the show because he definitely deserves it. There's no doubt about that. So, yeah, I'll leave it at that for the time being. We will leave it at that for the show today. Great to be back. I know it's been quite some time since I put out one of these shows. Apologies for that. A lot of different moving parts going on in my own life right now. But we're back, and we're going to get into a nice groove here. We'll get into Wednesdays every single week going forward, and then we might get a little bit, more aggressive as we get into the off season. Maybe we'll do 2 a week, and then as the season gets a little bit closer, maybe 3 a week. We'll get into that in time, obviously, but a lot of stuff happening in college football. Next time around, we will get into spring practice. We'll get into a little bit of a spring recap. I'll get into some of my favorite portal acquisitions, some of my favorite portal teams going into next year. A lot of different things to talk about, but we'll get into all of it next week. I will see you next Wednesday with my new cool background. We'll talk about it all next Wednesday, and I will see you then.